These are the plaintiffs, Heather and Doug. Heather says the defendant's huge Siberian Husky grabbed her poor little Pomeranian by the neck during a violent, unprovoked attack, and the defendant won't do the decent thing and refund her for the vet bills. Her dog was 100% at fault, and she's here suing for the $3,973.83 she's owed. This is the defendant, Julie. She says her 40-pound Husky was on a short, tight leash, and the plaintiff's dog was on one of those long, loose leashes, and they couldn't control her, and a fight broke out as they passed one another on the sidewalk. She feels bad about the whole thing, but isn't responsible for these vet bills. She's accused of failing to control her Husky.
All parties, please raise your right hands.
Welcome back to the People's Court. Next case on the docket, the plaintiff says that their poor little Pomeranian was attacked by the defendant's Siberian Husky, and the Siberian Husky owners will not pay the vet bills. But the defendant says the plaintiffs failed to control their little dog, and she's sorry, but she owes them nothing. It's the case of that's one hulking Husky.
Thank you, Douglas.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ms. Heather and Mr. Doug, you are suing Ms. Julie for $3,973.83 that you have expended in vet bills because, according to you, Ms. Julie's dog attacked your dog and caused that damage. Let me hear from you.
Okay, my daughter Samantha and I were walking Walter the morning of February 20th, and Walter stopped to go to the restroom, and we could see down at the corner Julie and her dog were heading towards us on the sidewalk. So Walter's going to the bathroom, I'm picking it all up. Julie is getting closer to us, and my daughter Samantha looks at Julie and is about ready to comment, "Oh, your dog has beautiful eyes." At that point, our dog Walter was looking away from their dog, her Husky, and was looking just ready to go home. He was done, and her Husky, Julie's Husky, came around Walter and grabbed him by the neck in his mouth. So Walter was in his mouth. Now, Walter only has one eye, so his peripheral vision, he didn't even see it coming. So meanwhile, Walter is in his mouth, crying, flailing about, trying to get out of the dog's mouth. The dog threw Walter to the floor. Walter was able to squirm out of his harness. He was not in his harness anymore, and the dog threw Walter to the floor. Thank goodness Walter did not run because he did not have the harness on him anymore. I think he was just in a state of shock. So my daughter Samantha and I picked up Walter and ran home.
How did Walter get out of the harness?
By squirming and just trying to get away from the dog as Walter was in the dog's mouth. We ran home, and Julie didn't even say anything, didn't comment, "I hope your dog is okay," didn't do anything. So we ran all the way home to make sure that Walter was okay, because he was not, he was frozen basically. So we ran home, and at that point, we took him home. He seemed okay at the moment. So we went on with our day, but as the day progressed, he got worse.
Okay,
so
stop. When you say he seemed okay at the moment, what does that mean? You've described a really brutal attack. Are you saying that the Husky didn't even break skin? There were no puncture wounds. There was nothing. There was no blood. There was nothing. Okay, so as the day progressed, and Walter was acting normal. Then as the day progressed, what happened?
Then he stopped eating. He wasn't eating. He wanted nothing for dinner. He is an eater. He wanted nothing for dinner. He didn't drink, and his breathing sounded very labored.
All right, and what time of the day did the dog attack happen? What time of the day?
It was probably about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, so it was early. And then when do you notice that the dog is not eating dinner?
We would take him for a walk, probably around 5. We noticed he wasn't eating.
5 p.m.
And his breathing.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so we're talking about 10 hours later, you notice the breathing and the lack of eating, and then what happens?
And then we called the emergency vet, and they said we should bring him in. So we took him to the emergency vet hospital, and they did x-rays, they did all that stuff, and they came to the conclusion that he aspirated because of the force of the husky throwing Walter to the floor. He aspirated, and that caused him to have pneumonia by the sheer force of throwing Walter to the floor. So he had to have x-rays. He was in a breathing tent for 2 nights in the hospital, in the emergency hospital. And he had to have
And the diagnosis was aspirate pneumonia, right? That was the diagnosis,
Correct.
aspirate pneumonia.
Correct.
Did the vet find any contusions, like a pulmonary contusion?
No.
Did the vet find any broken skin?
No.
Was anything broken?
No.
Was there any bruising?
No, there was no bruising. It was all just internally inside him.
Was there any internal bleeding?
No. No bleeding.
The only thing they found was aspirate pneumonia.
Correct.
Ms. Julie, why don't you tell me how things went down?
Sure. Okay, so I was on a walk with Olive, and I saw Walter walking towards me. I remember we smiled at each other, maybe said hi. I walk Olive on a very short leash, and I usually hold her by the handle that's like only 1.5 feet so that she's healing. So she was walking on my left side on the outside of the sidewalk, and they were coming towards us, and Walter was on a longer leash, and he was in the middle of the sidewalk. And then, everything seemed fine. And then as soon as he got past me, I felt Olive's, yank on the leash. I turned around. She had grabbed Walter by the neck. So I immediately turned around, saw what was happening, and I yanked on Olive's leash and said her name, I think. And she immediately let him go. And she is not a large husky. She's a small husky. So Walter couldn't have been more than 1.5 feet off the ground. And she didn't shake him. She immediately let him go. And I asked her several times, is he okay? Is he okay? Is your dog okay? She didn't say anything to me. And I could see Walter, and he seemed okay, thankfully. He was just kind of panting. He wasn't crying or making any noise. And then they left and didn't say anything to me. So
what's the name of your dog, Heather? No.
Walter.
Samantha? Wait, what's your... Walter. Why'd you name the dog Walter?
He was a rescue, so he came with that name, and it fit him perfectly. So he was a little old man, always.
It's a great. It really is like a little... All right, so I'm looking at your vet's reports. The attack occurred very briefly. There were no visible external wounds. Walter was found struggling while hanging from his neck as the other dog grabbed him and held him above the ground. He was let free of his harness and fell onto his chest. I mean, we're talking about 6 inches. There's no hemorrhage, no immediate changes to his behavior, no signs of respiratory distress. Now, Walter was under medical care already, right?
Correct.
Walter has cancer?
He did. He has passed away since this time. So,
I'm so sorry,
but he
honey.
did have
I'm
cancer.
so sorry.
Thank you.
So this is what you are hanging your hat on here, which is item number 2 in the discussion's recommendations. Walter's symptoms are suspected due to aspiration pneumonia. And aspiration pneumonia is when something goes into your lungs that doesn't belong there and then causes the pneumonia, right?
Yes.
When Walter fell onto his chest, he may have had a silent reflux causing aspiration, then later developing aspiration pneumonia. The patterns seen today on his radiographs are not consistent with pulmonary contusion. That was one of the first things I was looking for to see if, if you slam me on the ground, I may have a pulmonary contusion, and we can definitely link what happened to the pneumonia. But I gotta tell you, as hard as your doctor is trying to get your vet bills paid by this lady, I'm having some difficulty. There's no question that her dog shouldn't have bit your dog on the neck. But there is some question about how violent that was when it didn't break skin. There's no contusions. There's no pierce. There's no internal bleeding. There's no, you describe this really violent thing. She's describing this momentary thing, and the vet actually says it was really quick. And then the vet's guessing, because even the vet doesn't say this is how it happened. When the vet is saying, well, maybe this may have happened. It may be a result of, but how? It's so much more likely, particularly when the symptoms didn't even come up in the beginning of the day. It's so much more likely that it had to do with eating at some point, or aspirating something, saliva, or doing, there's so many other things that could lead to the pneumonia other than this super, super stretch that it was a dog grabbing the neck and then letting go. And her dog is not that tall. I mean, it's just, I defer to vets all the time, but even your vet knows that they're stretching when they say, well, maybe this is what happened. When you come to court, you have to be able to prove that it is, by a preponderance of the evidence, it is more likely than not that it's her dog's fault. And even your own vet only uses like the theory. This may be what happened. That's not more likely than not. And based on the circumstances of what has been described, I am so sorry that you have these tremendous bills that I know you were footing even before this. But when I see a history of coughing and aspirate pneumonia, doesn't seem like it could be caused by this. I'm so suspicious. And then I read the vet's notes and it's like, well, it may have been caused. May doesn't cut it to cause her to pay you $4,000. It just doesn't. And I know she feels awful. And I feel awful that your dog passed away. I feel awful that you had all those bills. But I cannot, on the words may have been caused, force her to pay you $3,973.83, especially not with the dog's history. That's my verdict, and I wish you all good luck.
Thank you.
So the plaintiffs have failed to prove their case, and the judge finds for the defendant. Heather, Doug, let me ask you how you feel about the outcome. What do you think of the judge's decision?
Extremely disappointed. I mean, we have to respect the verdict, even though we disagree. But the fact remains that he did not have these problems until the dog attack, and it seems to me as though it's focusing on the may when, to us, the facts support our case.
Julie, I know you feel bad about all of this happening, but let me ask you your reaction to this case.
I feel relieved. My family felt the same way from the paperwork. We felt like Walter had a lot of other health conditions and that this encounter between our dogs didn't cause that. And it was a very expensive vet bill. So, really relieved and happy that, we don't have to pay it.
Well, this little guy, Walter, this Pomeranian dog, apparently was quite he was a tough customer. He was tougher than a $2 steak because he fought cancer for a long time.
The dog was having chemotherapy.
He was in chemo. He only had one eye, etc. And then this incident happened, and unfortunately, he ends up with pneumonia. But you couldn't really say more likely than not it resulted from this based on the evidence that you had.
No, I mean, if anything, when I know the plaintiff is upset, but when he says the evidence supports it because it didn't happen until the attack, no, the attack happened at 7 a.m. and we're calling it an attack. It was a brief encounter where, grab the dog, let go of the dog, and it didn't even pierce the skin. Nothing, no contusions, no stitches, no pierced skin, nothing.
Not enough to carry the
no shaking, no anything. I mean, that's why the vet said may, because 10 hours later.
Right.
And aspirate pneumonia happens in a moment,
And the vet's notes did indicate a history of coughing, that he was overweight, etc. But, God bless Heather and Doug for adopting a rescue like that and giving him the many happy years that he had.
Justin wants to know this. Hey, Harvey, can my employer force me to stay home from work because there's a greater risk for someone like me to contract COVID? Isn't it my risk and my choice? Well, employers can say, look, we want to be safe in the office. And they're doing a lot of this right now where they are testing people for COVID if they come in. They are restricting who can come in. It is untested as to whether they can say, you've got a high risk situation, so you can't come in. That's just an untested area of the law. And we've talked about this before. The law has not caught up to the pandemic, and that's what's going to happen in the next couple of years.